Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue our discussion of the English Civil War and its effect on colonial America. Today's episode starts in May of 1646 as the colonies try to adjust to a lot of the adversity, whether it's economic or military, that they're facing from the English Civil War. And if you want to know more about that piece, I suggest you go back and start at the beginning of the series and roll your way forward to today. For those of you ready for a new episode, today we start in May of 1646, where a war vessel with 80 men comes and harbors at the Plymouth colony. The boat was under the leadership of Captain Thomas Cromwell, and they dump what William Bradford called, quote, more sin than money on the people. So this warship sitting in Plymouth, and we don't know much really about it, but it creates a problematic environment for William Bradford. Edward Winslow was sent over to England later that year to defend members of the colony against slanders presented to the Parliament. It's important to note here that the Plymouth Puritans have been removed from England for almost 40 years. So their viewpoint of religion and society is likely a bit different than the parliamentarians back in England. And it's even proven in the differences between the Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay colonies that we've seen for several episodes here. So Edward Winslow is going back to England. He's going back in the middle of this Civil War. And because of that, he would end up working for Oliver Cromwell. And Edward Winslow would never return to Plymouth. At the same time, Charles I is losing this war. It is slipping away from him. And his family escapes into exile before he surrenders his forces in May, thus ending the Civil War for now. The parliamentarians officially, though, at this point, have full control over the country. In Virginia, another war was coming to an end. After some success, colonial forces captured Ope-Takenau, and despite direct orders from Governor William Berkeley, Ope-Takenau is killed by one of his prison guards. He was thought to be close to 100 years old at the time. And if you'll recall from a long time ago on the podcast here, maybe a year ago now, he was thought to be involved in a massacre of Spanish friars long before the colony of Jamestown. He was thought to be the young boy at the time, Don Luis. But I don't think we'll ever know that, but I've enjoyed reading about the speculation. Virginia would make peace with Ope-Takenau's successor in October 1646. Not everything, though, was peaceful in the colonies. The Maryland colony was operating without a formal government, and a colonel by the name of Edward Hill was filling this void as the interim governor of the colony. In November 1645, a petition was sent from Maryland to England pleading for help and calling the current government there tyrannical. Now, this was the government that came in, took over, pushed Leonard Calvert out. The English Parliament recognized the Protestants as the legitimate government the following month. Meanwhile, William Claiborne, and we've talked about him in the past and his struggles with Kent Island, took this opportunity to retake Kent Island. Throughout 1646, Maryland is being plundered by the people who overtook it and their Puritan allies. The situation was so bad that Colonel Hill a Virginia farmer, soldier, and former member of the House of Burgesses, actually led an expedition to retake the colony. Hill would help expel the people that the locals referred to as pirates and named himself interim governor. Leonard Calvert, with the help of Governor William Berkeley, would raise a force to return to Maryland and restore order in December of 1646. Colonel Hill would willingly hand control of Maryland back over to Leonard Calvert. It's amazing how a civil war in England would change the relationship between Maryland and Virginia. Leonard Calvert's work, though, was not finished. The General Assembly of Maryland began meeting again, and Calvert pushed for criminal pardons against those individuals involved in the looting. But the Council of Maryland notes that there was still an effort underway to restore the property that had been taken during the time. So what it was you did not get charged with a crime, but we really want you to restore the property that you took. And it may have been one of those trade-offs where if you restore the property, you don't get charged with the crime. The pardoning of criminal offenses actually may have been effective in reducing violence and maintaining order, because after Calvert returned, not much really came up as a problem in Maryland. If anyone wants to know very specific details about who was involved in what, the early 1647 Maryland Council proceedings detail this. They detail returned property likely taken during the looting period. Sadly, Leonard Calvert would die in June of 1647 at the age of 40. At the time of his death, Calvert was the longest-serving governor in the colonies, and he named Thomas Green as his successor prior to his passing. Green was a Catholic and a Royalist, thus likely continuing that will of the Calvert family, and there's still Calvert family at the time in England. So Maryland seems to be stabilized under a Catholic Royalist government again. Meanwhile, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is debating how to deal with England's request to return the colony's patent, and we talked about that issue coming up a few weeks ago. England is currently controlled by the Puritans, who are sympathetic in beliefs to the Massachusetts Bay, but the colonists are still reluctant to return the patent. Remember, they said in a prior podcast that if we subject ourselves to this government by returning the patent, we are liable to further subject ourselves later to future laws and regulations. The colonists concluded that they were economically and militarily dependent upon England, that they owed allegiance to the mother country, and since the patent prescribed the government to yield to England, they may need to do so. Didn't say they did, said that they might have to because of this. The colonists determined that they wanted to act in a way that did not create disturbances within the English Parliament. John Winthrop weighs in with an interesting statement. Let's have a look. But if the Parliament should be less inclinable to us, we must wait upon Providence for the preservation of our just liberties. So it was about who would preserve their liberties. A very, very interesting statement made 140 years before the Declaration of Independence. The colonists were concerned that by turning over the patent, England may want more and more authority, and an example they actually used in the writings was the election of a governor. They enjoyed electing their own governor, and they did not want the English Parliament doing that for them. Very interesting for this time. Originally, the group decided to send Edward Winslow to England to argue that cause, and as we talked about earlier, he ended up going. But they actually decided not to send Edward Winslow. They wanted to send somebody else. So Edward Winslow's going back already on behalf of Plymouth. Massachusetts Bay is like, maybe he can speak on behalf of us. They decide not to do it. They decide to send somebody else. And then they decide to send Edward Winslow anyway. I guess it was a matter of, well, if you're heading over there anyways, you might as well speak on behalf of our cause. In 1647, tensions between the Dutch and the English began to rise. New Netherland would get a new governor, a man by the name of Peter Stuyvesant, and he arrives and immediately sends a letter to John Winthrop and William Bradford complaining about the colony of New Haven, which was a separate colony. It was in Connecticut but not a part of Connecticut, and their governor, Theo Eaton. Stuyvesant claims New Netherland has the right to the lands that New Haven is occupying, while obviously Governor Eaton claims he has those rights. Eaton also claims the Dutch are charging excessive rates for trade and proposes a boycott of their ports until a better deal can be negotiated. Former Governor William Kieft, that's of New Netherland, had gone so far as to burn down a New Haven trading post. So tensions there are about to boil over. And I don't know, we haven't seen anything yet, and we'll visit New Netherland at a later date. We don't know how much they know about what's going on in England, but being traders and merchants, they should know quite a bit. Unfortunately, Massachusetts Bay couldn't really jump in here because they had problems of their own. And that is in Rhode Island, of all places. The Rhode Island colony, which was made up of a few towns, officially united under its own General Assembly in 1643. While Roger Williams was seen as the first governor, he technically only led Providence in those early days. In May 1647, the Rhode Island General Assembly gathered and elected John Coggeshall as the colony's first official governor, but as I said previously, under the title of president. The General Assembly also passed the colony's first constitution, labeled the Acts and Orders of 1647. Let's take a look at some provisions in that constitution. It was agreed and ordered that a week before any general court, notice should be given to every town by the head officer that they choose a committee for the transaction of the affairs there, except it be for the election of general officers, and such as go not may send their votes sealed. It goes on to mention, we do voluntarily assent and are freely willing to receive and to be governed by the laws of England, together with the way of the administration of them, so far as the nature and constitution of this plantation will admit, desiring to hold a correspondence with the whole colony in the model that hath been lately shown unto us by our worthy friends of the island. So they are willing to be governed by England. However, they're creating these acts to sort of define how they're going to govern themselves. The acts go on to lay out the governing process in Rhode Island, where all business is handled by the colony's general court, starting in the individual towns. So they start in those towns, then they meet together. They also ordered an annual election on May 15th, which is very close on the calendar to the Massachusetts Bay General Court. They even had an oath of office printed within the laws. Let's have a look. Blank being called and chosen unto public employment, and the office of blank, by the free vote and consent of the inhabitants of the province of Providence Plantations, do in the present assembly engage yourself faithfully and truly to the utmost of your power to execute the commission committed unto you, and do hereby promise to do neither more nor less in that respect than that which the colony authorizes you to do, according to the best of your understanding. A little different than the oath of Connecticut. It was also ordered that the seal of the colony be an anchor, which we've actually shown in our exhibits today if you're on the YouTube channel. Each town was to have a council consisting of 6 men. They also paid Roger Williams £100, levied between the 3 towns, as compensation for his trip to England to obtain the colony's charter. When it came to military, the colony took a surprising approach. Let's have a look. It is ordered that there is free liberty granted for the free inhabitants of the province to erect a general artillery garden, and those that are desirous to advance the art military shall have the freedom to exercise themselves therein, and to agree of their form and choose their officers as they shall agree amongst themselves. So local control over the military, almost like a National Guard type deal, where the state or the colony of Rhode Island had very little input. Very interesting. Towns were also allowed to choose their military officers. The acts went on to have specific sections covering every area of society. An example here that may be interesting to look at is for the poor. Let's have a look. It is agreed and ordered by this present assembly that each town shall provide carefully for the relief of the poor, to maintain the impotent, and to employ the able, and shall appoint an overseer for the same purpose. The laws also covered marriage, adultery, slander, licenses, drunkenness, and the list goes on and on. Missing from the acts is any inference to the church. So just like Connecticut, they've really separated church and state here. The document represents one of the earliest, if not most complete, documents to separate church and state. In John Winthrop's writings, tensions had arisen with New England after it was alleged their residents were stealing and eating corn grown in the Massachusetts Bay by natives. President Coggeshall presented the Massachusetts Bay Colony with a warrant and seals claiming that the land in question was in Rhode Island and not within the jurisdiction of the Massachusetts Bay. I'm sure that went over well. The Massachusetts Bay General Court debated a military invasion of Rhode Island, but settled instead to send 3 messengers. At the same time, word was coming from England regarding the colony's pleas for the United Colonies' sovereignty there. The committee in England found that it could not render a decision until reviewing more physical evidence. Soon thereafter, though, another letter comes in reflecting Edward Winslow's arrival and delivery of a petition. The committee finds that it would, quote, not restrain the bounds of their jurisdiction, and acknowledge that England's intervention would be, quote, both very prejudicial, if not destructive, to the colony. So this is England in 1647 saying their intervention in Massachusetts Bay would be very prejudicial, if not destructive, to the colony. That opinion obviously would greatly change more than a century later. So Rhode Island moves on. Maryland moves on. It seems now like the Civil War, well, the fighting piece of England has ended. King Charles is still there, albeit in almost no power. And now what happens, with the colonies? Well, for one, we have not talked much about Connecticut, and there isn't a lot there. But it is time to talk about them because while all this is going on, Connecticut does something that Salem would be noted for a half a century later. They have a series of witch trials and witch hunting that occurs. And we'll talk about that next time on Historical Context.